Love's beautiful, but let's be real, it's not always easy. It can bring out our deepest fears, our strongest desires, and sometimes our most confusing patterns. Welcome to Love Better, a space for honest, soul-deep conversations about relationships, attachments, and what it really means to love and be loved. I am Shazmin Bank, and if you've ever questioned why love feels so complicated, you are not alone. Let's unpack this together. Discussing what our 4 attachment styles are and if our attachment styles are fixed and how could these attachment styles possibly play out in our adult relationships would be a really interesting podcast to talk about, especially because if we're going to be together on this journey, it'd be so important for you to be able to understand what is my attachment so that on all the other podcasts that come out, it's very relatable for me to be able to picture myself and put myself in the scenarios of the different topics that we will be covering. And this particular episode I thought was so beautiful because somebody actually sent me a voice message on Instagram, and she said that, how do I know what my attachment style is? I feel that I'm an avoidant, and could there be an attachment style that has avoidant and anxious together? And she felt that she was somebody that had taken so many steps to be more securely attached, and now she feels she's back to being an avoidant, which was something she feels was already underlying when she was a child. And so this is really, really common, first of all, for a lot of people to feel, what is my attachment style? And is it fixed? And can it move throughout the years? And also for a lot of people to be so confused with feeling that they moved and grew to be someone that was so much more secure, and situations arose in life and have put them into a different attachment place in their lives. First thing I want to start by saying is you have to be able to have a lot of grace when you are understanding your attachment style with the fact that your attachment style is not a personality disorder and it is not a diagnosis. It is literally a beautiful blueprint for you to be able to understand how you are wired to think the way you do and react the way you do in relationships, in different relationships, not only your intimate ones, but your friendships as well. And it'll give you a great insight also into how you respond in the workplace. And sometimes the bosses that you do attract, because everybody in your life is a redirection into having you needing to focus on what your core wounds are and calling onto you to be able to heal that part of yourself. So the first attachment style we're going to look at is the secure attachment, and we're going to look at how is secure attachment formed. So for all the attachments, this is pretty profound because your attachment style is actually formed between the ages of 0 and 2. And so whatever you're experiencing in your adult relationships is subconsciously what you have rewired by repeat and play from 0 to 2 and afterwards up until the age you are right now. So it doesn't mean that it's fixed, but it's more a subconscious behavior because of repetition. So as we all know with neuroplasticity, change can happen when we take the steps to grow in whatever attachment style we will be in. So it's not something that you have to feel, oh my God, as I'm listening to the podcast, I'm not someone secure and I feel this is detrimental. It's actually so profoundly beautiful to be able to know what your attachment style is, and it really gives you an moment into that's why I react the way I do. And also, while we're going to be looking into how our attachment style was formed, this is not a moment to take a poke at our parents on how we grew up, and this is not a moment to go into trauma on how we grew up, even though we're very sensitive to trauma because there was real life events that happened to some of us. But this is really an opportunity for you to be able to understand your blueprint and know 100% it's healable. So the first attachment style, as I was saying, is secure attachment. And what is a secure child? How did they grow up? Well, they were somebody that was pretty much programmed by a caregiver that they can really rely on a caregiver consistently for their needs to be met. So this child really grew up knowing that they are so worthy, because every time they had a bid for connection or every time they had a need, they had a parent that was very intuitive to be able to respond to this child, to spend time with this child, to take their time as a parent to really see in the best interest, what does this child need? So if the child was crying or throwing a tantrum, the parent never really pushed this child away. They really pulled the child closer. And so the child understood that if I cry or I scream or I have my needs needing to be met, my parent is going to meet it with such gentle, loving care. And therefore, as a child, you form the programming and opinion that I am so worthy of this love. I don't have to do anything other than really be myself and, show the emotions that I show naturally that arise in me, and nobody's going to put me down about that. So secure parents really sort of rushed to the aid of the child and made the child feel very seen, no matter what it was that they were doing. The most important thing is that the child grows up knowing that they can trust the bond between them and the caregiver. The environment is very, very safe for them to be who they are. The next attachment style is the anxious attachment style. And this child grew up in an environment that had a lot of care, it had a lot of love, but it could have been very inconsistent. So the parents could have been working, they could have been really busy. And in the moments that the child was bidding for connection and bidding for love, that never came through fully and would leave the child at moments feeling very abandoned or rejected and neglected. And there were the other moments when the parents were very present to the child, giving the child the love and very attentive to those bids and their needs. And so the child grew up in a little bit of this conflict on your love is present, but your love isn't fully there when I need it. And when I do need it and I'm trying to reach out for it, you've left me. So the child grows up feeling this deep sense of abandonment. And it could just be that the parents had to both work and they were both extremely busy, and it was not a matter of I don't love you, but it's a matter of we love you and we've had you, but life is going on and we need to put food on the table and pay our bills, which the child doesn't understand. And so the child takes this neglect or having to grow up with, more of the nanny's attention or with the grandparents' attention as I'm not worthy of your love because you've left me and abandoned me. So the anxious child is really programmed to feel love is not consistent. I cannot trust this. And the repetition and the programming moves through the child feeling these little pockets where they could have, in a moment painted something or done something in their childhood that was so important for them. And when they took it to a parent for the praise or to be seen in that moment, the parent could have naturally just been having a normal bad day. They could have just been busy in the moment. And so it was the little moments like that that was stacked where the child is looking to be seen in this drawing or painting and looking for the praise. And the parent probably didn't fulfill that in the way that this child was looking for. So this child learned, okay, I didn't do good enough, or I'm not doing enough to have gotten seen in this moment. So the child really wants this love, but their brain is programmed to feel that this is just not going to be something consistent. So this child really ends up feeling that they have a lot of trust issues as an anxious attachment. They could have also experienced neglect, and they could have experienced mistreatment from a parent as well. And the early separation from this parent or caregiver really triggers their nervous system. So they ended up having a very difficult time having to spend time alone with themselves. And sometimes they probably experienced a lot of feelings of jealousy, maybe with the other sibling, watching how the other siblings got seen, or, they would feel that I already feel that I don't have enough time with a parent, and now my siblings have to get all this other attention. So the jealousy towards that, and, it just lead them to feeling so unworthy and also highly sensitive to criticism, because the anxiously attached child would be hypervigilant to noticing when they can get attention in the house and when things could be, not so safe to bid for that connection. So you can have grown up with a narcissistic parent or experienced a lot of trauma in growing up in a home as an anxiously attached person, and it really taught you that you are not somebody that gets love unless you do. You are not somebody that gets love unless you work for it. And this is what we'll discuss a little later on in what it pushes you into in your relationship as an adult to have to do to get that love as well. But definitely growing up as somebody anxious, your biggest primary core wound is that sense of abandonment. And that's constantly leading you to feel that in order to not be abandoned, you have to do a lot or be a lot in order to always be loved. And your mind was never really focused on you as a child because you didn't feel so worthy of that love. You were more focused on how to get attention from this parent or your caregiver. So you lost and pretty much abandoned yourself from a very young age, and that repetition has played out up until the adult age you are listening to this podcast right now. We have the third attachment style, which is the fearful avoidant. And now this child really grew up with caregivers who could have been very abusive, or they could just have been neglectful, or they could have just been caregivers that were extremely busy, but very, very, very inconsistent with how they loved somebody. And so, it would lead this child to understanding they cannot trust and believe that they're worthy of being seen. So fearful avoidance really grew up as children feeling very alone, and they were almost always told not to cry, to just be somebody that's very strong regardless of your gender. It was not a situation of you are a boy, so toughen up and don't cry. It could have been regardless of your gender. You were very much taught not to dive into emotion. You never really grew up seeing emotion in the family. You never grew up seeing your family hugging. Like more in a securely attached family, you would see that. And more even in an anxiously attached family, you'd be able to see that kind of love between the family. But with, the people that are fearfully avoidant, they grew up very solo, very lonely as children. And there's some children that would realize they were the kids that played alone and they couldn't really trust their home environment when they would come home from school to really be seen and given that love and attention of how was school, what happened, what are your teachers doing. There was some avoidance that grew up actually feeling when they would come from school and they've actually had a really hard day, or they were bullied by a teacher or a student as well, that when they would come home and tell the parent would actually smack them or hit them for being naughty to have been put in that situation. They were never really held or understood for what happened for that to have, transpired in school. And they were not the parent that rushed to school to make sure you don't do this to my child. So the child really started to understand that they were going to be somebody that's on their own, and the inconsistency of the love from the parents really had this child believe, I cannot trust anybody, and I don't believe anybody could stay by my side or love me the way I actually want, because if I couldn't as a child get that from the caregivers or the parents that I had, not to villainize parents at all, but that's because that was the journey those parents were on, and that was the best way they could love their child at that time. It does leave the child with very deep wounds. And so the child basically learns, I cannot rely on anybody, but I do want love, and I crave love, and I want to be seen. And so the only way to be seen would be for me to really be doing something worthy of being seen. And the worthiness of being seen is really being somebody that wins academically, or they win in sport, or they win in the art segment or the music segment. Something where the parents, their lives really stop to reflect and see this child, and then they praise the child for being that amazing. But no one really stops to hold this child and see if this is even what the child wants to do. The child doesn't even have the ability to have the conversations with themselves and say, well, I'm actually doing a sport or something that I don't love in order to be seen, but they grow up feeling this is what gets me seen, so I will learn to do more of this. And that's why you have fearful avoidance that really do grow up being the very charming sort of adults who can get into a relationship, and one of the most common words a lot of people will say about having met or been in a relationship in the beginning with somebody that was fearfully avoidant was that they were extremely charming. Fearful, attachers really feel that they are defective, and they feel that they do not need love or closeness. So at whatever cost, they will always just protect themselves, because if they can protect themselves, they'll always feel safe. Because you can imagine, as a child, you're looking for love and you're looking for attention, and if you're ridiculed out of that neediness, then as an adult, on repeat, if that shows up in different parts of your life with different people and different friends, and it just keeps reinforcing that wound that you have, you keep growing up saying, I'm never ever going to show people that I'm vulnerable. Because in the home environment, if with my own parents I couldn't be vulnerable, and my parents are the core people in my life I have to be able to trust, then I cannot trust the love of anybody else. If my parents were inconsistent in their love, if my parents instilled fear in my core and I confused love and fear with them, then I'm never putting myself in that position as an adult to be ever let down. So I will always come across as someone that has to rely on myself, and therefore, they are very, very, very sensitive to criticism. And in their adulthood, you'd find that fearful avoidance actually are people that will grow up really being able to hide away from emotion by having some sort of an addiction to numb the pain, or for them to not have to deal with any sort of an emotion. So they're the kind of kids that will smoke pot. They're the kind of kids that drink to numb how they feel. They're the kind of kids that are addicted to pornography from a young age. They are the children that binge watch TV, because anything to numb out dealing with an emotion. It's not where any fearful avoidant goes immediately. If something's not working, they are logically trying to solve this. They're not emotionally trying to solve this. They hate conflict, and they hate feeling like they are going to be trapped, because that makes them feel very, very weak. So fearful avoidants always feel in their core like they already don't belong in scenarios, that they have to work very hard to joke or show up in scenarios with people, at gatherings, at events. They have to be more charming, and they have to rely more on being charismatic, because if they're just vulnerably who they are, they don't get seen for that part. So they do have the tendency to really withdraw and isolate themselves. But at the same time, they really crave wanting to feel safe in a love. And so they are definitely the attachment style that needs appreciation to grow, because they respond very well to positive reinforcement compared to negative reinforcement. And they tend to fear really being themselves. They've not grown up feeling, who am I? Or ever pausing to reflect on, who they are, why they work the way they do, why they behave the way they do. They're very logically inclined to solving problems. They cannot take any sort of putting them down, and they sort of have their ego protecting them a lot, because they don't reach into their heart to be able to feel safe in love, because they feel that when they do start to feel safe, this person could abandon them, because that's very much a wound fearful avoidants have that's in common with the anxious person, is their deep fear of abandonment as well. And then we have the fourth attachment style, which is the disorganized attachment style. And the disorganized attachment child really grew up in chronic chaos. So they never really experienced a consistency of love at all. They are the attachment style that ends up really feeling the push and pull of the love with their caregivers. They couldn't even depend on the caregivers. They're the sort of child that came home and the parent is not home to greet them or love them or care for them or talk to them or nurture them as this child. They really, from a young age, learn they have to be extremely independent even though fearful avoidance are also extremely independent, but fearful avoidance also have a very deep need to be loved in a relationship. But when you look at the disorganized attached, they have this deep fear within them because they grew up with, let's say, if it was an alcoholic parent, and they could have had one parent that was extremely strong and one parent that could have been very weak and was not able to protect them. So they could have had this alcoholic parent that, would walk into the door screaming, shouting, breaking things, abusive to the other parent, and they're witnessing this. And this parent is, hurting them, hurting their siblings around them, but this child feels powerless. But remember, just still as a child, you are craving and wanting the love of a parent. So this parent is abusive and then they leave, and then they could, be trying to reform and be a better parent, and they come back into the home and they're giving this child love now. The child is now seeing this parent is loving, the other parent that was being abused. And so it's so chaotic because they start to form this impression that through the trauma of what they're seeing, that this is love. Love is abusive. Love is inconsistent. You could have a parent that, for example, like the mother who's an alcoholic or is on drugs, and one day they are super angry and violent with the child, and then the next day they could be sobering up and trying to really get their life together, and so now they're really loving and really happy in the home and with the child. And then you could have them going through a withdrawal and they're going through a really hard time, and now they're sad and crying. And so this child is literally watching their caregivers and their parents in a constant state of confusion and a constant state that's not secure and a beautiful base for a child to be able to grow up. So they're always telling this child that love's inconsistent. You cannot rely on me as a parent. I don't know if I can show up and be there for you. I'm not the parent that attends your sports days. I'm not the parent that is always attending every single play. I could be the parent that attends some of them, but then I leave you embarrassed maybe with my behavior in some of them, and you're having to come rescue me as the child or have excuses for my behavior. And as a child, you're starting to notice other parents don't really behave this way, but you question it, but don't really question it because this is just home, and you're not growing up, in an environment where you're seeing other children, really face what you're facing, or you could be, but it's a mixture. You could be growing up with other children that are really being loved. You could grow up with other children that are feeling so secure in who they are. And so you tend to even withdraw in the school environment because it just feels safer from a younger age to be on your own. If you cannot trust who you can be in your home environment, and you cannot trust who can love you in a home environment, then very much you will not be able to trust that a teacher or your friends in school could be able to give you that kind of a love. So these children really experience a lot of sadness and a lot of anger, and they could also grow up with a parent that's very narcissistic. So their view is completely on the opposite spectrum of growing up on what a secure child could be growing up with. So they really grow up as adults to have this complete push and pull dynamic. They're very hot and cold because through the abuse, their nervous system learns to freeze around their parents because their parents have taught them that they are unpredictable. With the physical abuse, with the violent abuse, a lot of times sexual abuse, and this really affects the disorganized attachment style. Now, disorganized attachment style is a push and pull between anxiously attached and fearfully avoidantly attached. You have both spectrums within you. So you want love and you crave it, but you cannot trust it. So you'll always sabotage that love when you have it. And you'll somehow always tend to pull in the partners that can see you are so worthy of being loved because they see the beauty in who you are. They fall in love with the core of who you are, but you've never really experienced sitting with the core of who you are, healing the core of who you are, or being in love with yourself, that it's very hard to ever believe that somebody could love you this way or want to be around you in this way. So in adult relationships, secure people will really be the kind of person that in a relationship they can handle conflict, they can handle the ups and downs, they're able to really be there for themselves. Secure people really put themselves first, they can prioritize themselves and simultaneously really create beautiful space and love on their partner and be very attentive and curious towards their partner. They are somebody where conflict doesn't scare them if they're securely attached. They have the ability to trust that they have the tools to be able to handle conflict and get their partner through that level of conflict as well. But that being said, you can have somebody that's securely attached and they can get into a relationship with somebody that's avoidant, and it can trigger their anxious attachment. So our attachment styles are not fixed. It doesn't mean that because you are secure, you could be secure for the rest of your life, or because you're anxious, fearful, or disorganized attachment, that's who you are. You could be somebody that is very anxiously attached, and you can come out of a very traumatic relationship with somebody that's avoidant, and you've not done the work to heal through that. You probably had an avoidant leave you in the relationship in a very bitter way, and it probably could have you move into avoidant attachment, which means now you don't trust relationships, you just don't want to ever be in one again, you don't want to move in that direction of romance right now because you're completely broken. So you could be extremely anxious, and by the time you get out of a relationship, you could be pretty avoidant. And you can also have a lot of people that are anxiously attached or avoidantly attached, and they move into secure. Now, that being said, in my experience, I've definitely found a lot of anxious people tend to want to work through their feelings more, and a lot of anxious people tend to want to work on the relationship more and being able to heal. So because anxious people are really pulled to have their relationship work, they are very pro to self-help and reading about different topics and attachment styles and their partner's attachment style and how can they fix and be the savior of that relationship. So you tend to have a lot of anxious people wanting to learn about attachment styles and then being introduced into what a secure attachment style could be and be inclined to wanting to heal into secure attachment. Or you could have somebody in an anxiously attached relationship that's very abusive emotionally, verbally, and physically, and they're inclined to want to heal into a secure attachment. And then that being said, you could still have an anxiously attached person that's in a verbally or physically or mentally abusive relationship, and they move to the opposite end of wanting to be avoidantly attached because they've just not doing the work to be able to heal, to be secure. So secure people in a relationship really have the ability to have an extremely healthy relationship. And a healthy relationship meaning they have the ability to show up in the ups and downs and the reality of what a relationship could bring. So whether there's financial loss or debts or loss of job or a change in life, securely attached people really have the ability to navigate that with the natural anxiety that can arise in anybody. So it doesn't mean securely attached people, do not experience ups and downs, highs and lows of emotions. They do, but they really are very secure and confident in their base and how to navigate it. Now, that being said, you could have had a couple of wounds in your childhood that can leave you feeling when certain things happen in your life, you tend to move a little bit more into the anxious way of thinking. So it's pretty interesting because I was having a conversation with my son the other day and I asked his permission if I could talk about this. And so he has more of a very secure attachment base, but he also tends to notice when something could be shifting in his life. He does tend to move into an anxious attachment in dealing with it. And because he's more securely based, he can sit with the anxiety that does bring up for him. But then he has the ability to navigate that wound, understand it, self-soothe and regulate. Doesn't mean he does it perfectly or, very quick, but he has the ability to notice consciously what he's feeling and what he's going through. And sometimes he could need support to get through it. Other times he's able to do that on his own. But his ability to communicate very well what he's feeling is what can help him move back from anxious into secure. So you can see that your attachment styles definitely do fluctuate in any sort of a scenario. I was working with somebody that is very anxiously attached and tended to notice that they attracted a very narcissistic boss, and they became extremely subservient in the workplace and just felt like nothing they did was enough. And they started to play out a role, which was very interesting because we discovered that they literally attracted the parent that was narcissistic when they were growing up. And so they were now all of a sudden living the nightmare as a child and a parent again, but in an adult body, more in the work environment. And so when they were able to work through the abandonment, the rejection wounds, everything that comes up from the anxiously attached, they were able to hold more space and start to vocalize and create room for who they were in the workplace with this narcissistic person, and be able to hold, more of accountability and a voice in that situation. So we've looked at how secure people can act when they are in an adult relationship. Now, when we have somebody that's anxious in an adult relationship, they are truly some of the most beautiful people you could meet. Anxious attached people are very loving. They are very kind. They're extremely loyal. They are the kind of people that are the penguin. They want to pair for life with the love of their life. They want to be with this person and work through the ups and downs of life with this person. And they are the person just absolutely willing to give all of themselves to that relationship. They play the savior, the fixer role, the rescuer role. And they don't realize that a lot of the times at the cost of themselves, the cost of their career, the cost of finances, the cost of friendships, they tend to really isolate themselves, because anxiously attached people really move into wanting to focus on the other person and making that relationship their primary base of their attention, which means that they will be able to abandon themselves because they've already done it at such a young age, having to rescue and have a savior role in the family as well. When they were growing up, maybe they were the advisor or they were the child, navigating the relationship between their parents and the fights that their parents were having, and they were the child going to advise the mother and advise the father and sort of patch mom and dad up together. And they were very hyper vigilant to the moods in the house and the fights that could have erupted in the house or the withdrawal of love in the house. And so they tend to be hyper vigilant in the relationship as well, and they tend to notice when their partner pulls away in the relationship or the partner's not in a great mood. And anxiously attached people make all the meanings mean that they are not worthy or something's wrong with them. That's why there's the rejection. That's why the text didn't come back. And this can also be with their friends. They tend to feel if they weren't included, that something could be wrong with them, or they're not liked. They don't have the ability to just feel, if I wasn't included, it doesn't really matter. I can still call up my friends, or I could join and say, hey guys, I'd love to join. They take it extremely personally. Even in the workplace, they're all about needing to fit in, and everyone needs to love them and like them. And they tend to be the extreme people pleasers. So they just feel unbelievably exhausted in relationships with friends and relationships with family, and then intimate relationships, because they are always putting the other person first, even at the cost of themselves. So if they want to say no and they wanted to spend some time or do something they really love and they're called upon, they feel this need to abandon what they want, and they will naturally, subconsciously people please everyone else around them because of the praise and the love and the notice that they get. And even if it's at the cost of them being extremely sick, and they cook and their partner and their family is like, oh my God, you cooked when you're so sick and I can't believe you did that and you're so special and the food was amazing. They take that as, if I'm ever sick and I take time off or I say I cannot cook, I could lose that love. So anxiously attached people really give themselves in a relationship. They love, and they want to love for life. They want to love through the ups and downs, even though they don't naturally have the deep vulnerability to get through some of the relationships by communicating very, very well. And when you have somebody that's disorganized attachment and they are in an adult relationship, they are really experiencing that push and pull, hot and cold with their partner. So they literally want to be in a relationship, but when the relationship comes to an end, the disorganized attachment person is feeling the biggest relief because they're just always craving independence. They feel that the relationship gets too much. In the beginning, it seems to be easy because they can control the pace. The relationship should go at the pace they want. And when now the other person needs a bit too much, they get frustrated, they get irritated, and they feel that they don't have the consistency of love within themselves to be able to give themselves. How could they give it in a relationship? So really, when the other person wants more of them, it shines a light on a disorganized, attached person to feel they have a lack. It doesn't shine a light on them to feel, wow, there's something within me that my partner wants more of me. They feel my partner is seeing something that's a lack within me. So they're very quick to end relationships and then call people back. And, they have a deep anxiety on not wanting to be alone. So they're the kind of people that can be in a relationship, but they would probably prefer a long distance relationship because that's easier to be in. They don't need to meet the other person all the time. They don't have to be, physically with the other person all the time. They at least don't have to be intimate with the other person all the time. So fearful avoidant and disorganized avoidant have very, very big problems eventually with intimacy, which I'll get later into another podcast about. But they are terrified about deep levels of intimacy. So they can very much be there for sex, but they're not there for lovemaking or a deep connection or a deep bond with their partner. And in some cases, they're just not available even for sex. So disorganized, attached people really leave their partners feeling they just don't understand their partner. You want me, then you don't want me. You love me, then you don't love me. And they can have this partner that could have been secure spiraling into somebody that's now anxiously attached because now they're feeling their self-worth has been triggered and they need to self-abandon at the cost of trying to just hold on to this relationship. So the disorganized fear, the disorganized abuse that they could have gone through will never allow them to be able to open up in a new relationship because they've just not healed or introspected or ever worked on what could have been going on within them. And it leaves them in a lot of pain because they can see the pain they cause, but yet they're not going to go into that pain ever because they don't want to ever deal with, being the person that can hurt somebody else. And so they're very much the kind of person after some distance and some space, and they go out and they date a little bit and get lost in, the freedom. They're the kind of person that would, drop a message to their partner again and try pull them right back in. Or they can be in this relationship and, when the partner's calling, it's just frustrating for them. They rather the partner's just almost, scripted. Like, you show up when I need you, don't show up when I don't want you. And obviously that's not how a relationship works. And if you tend to be with someone that's also disorganized, attached, you tend to be with someone that most likely will be anxiously attached. So they try harder. And you can have somebody that's also securely attached. And when they start to notice they're getting anxiously attached, or they start to notice their partner's negative behaviors of the push and pull, they're very much the people that can say, I don't think this relationship's for me. I wish you all the best, and I want to find somebody that's more for me. Now, one of the things you have to realize is when you're starting to heal your anxious avoidant attachment, very often you will find that when you meet someone securely attached, you can find that they are boring. They are someone you don't have to have chaos to be around. You don't have to do much for their love. You just have to be yourself. But you have been wired and conditioned in your nervous system to understand love equals chaos. To get seen is a fight. To get my needs met means we'll argue and fight about it and I still won't get my needs met. But now when I'm with somebody secure, I don't have to go through that loop or that toxic cycle. This secure person just sees me for who I am, and they are so curious about me, and I don't have to go far. And so you could end up almost feeling this is not going to last, or this is too good to be true. And so you have a habit of sabotaging that love. So even if you're listening to the podcast right now and you look back and you think, oh my God, I dated that secure person that I thought was boring, but they were actually safe. And my nervous system had never been conditioned to that level of safe. And I tend to have that a lot with people who will turn around and go, oh my God, I think I dated somebody that I could have spent the rest of my life with. And I made the biggest mistake because I had just come out of a relationship with somebody that had me wired for all this noise in a relationship. And now when I met the secure person, it was too soon. I wasn't healed. I didn't know what secure love looks like. I didn't even know what a healthy relationship should look like. It was not something I was striving for. And yep, I could have lost somebody pretty amazing. And a lot of the times you have somebody that says, I went from dating avoidance and I started to date somebody that was secure, and they just came across more as a friend, because secure people really have the ability to notice who they want to be in a relationship with. And they're also extremely picky about wanting to be with somebody that's intellectually and maturely at their level. They're very quick to be able to see how other people could behave with the push, the pull, the hot, the cold. And then at some point, secure people just tend to respect what you want, and they're not going to push the agenda with you anymore, because they're all about wanting to feel good and love themselves. So when you're trying to heal, which is very possible, so you can heal your attachment, you can heal your nervous system. It's the same way with repetition. You've stayed in the blueprint of who you are. With new repetition and new awareness of first just soaking in what your attachment style is, we can then look into what does it take to be somebody more secure, and how do we embody securement into our nervous system so that we can actually grow to have healthier relationships. And that being said, you've got to remember, as you're healing, triggers will always come up. And it doesn't mean that if you were somebody that was anxiously attached and you're healing to be secure and a trigger comes up for you that you failed. We have to be really kind with ourselves with attachment styles, because they are just simply blueprints. It's literally just something that enlightens you into the patterns and triggers on who you are, how you grew up, why you're wired the way that you are. And now that you have the attention upon yourself and your wounds on what makes you do the things that you do and why you behave the way that you do. It also gives you a really good insight into understanding why your attachment style can fluctuate from betrayal, rejection, failed relationships, just different scenarios. And it helps you understand that you can heal to be somebody that's absolutely secure. So you might be somebody that's thinking, well, what was the point of knowing my attachment styles? And it really is just a fundamental, beautiful, eye-opening place for you to start to understand who you are, how you work, getting to know yourself, making sense of the reason you behave the way that you do in relationships and with yourself. And either way, learning about your attachment style really helps you understand that you're anxious, your fearful, and your disorganized attachment style are all insecure, which does mean that there's healing to be done to be able to work into somebody that is more securely attached. I will look at doing other podcasts in a lot more detail of just what an anxiously attached person is, how they behave in adult relationships, and how they can grow to be more secure. And the same with the avoidant attachment style, on how they show up in relationships and how they can really move to be able to heal, to create a better dynamic for themselves, because you will always find that the anxious and the avoidant attachment style tend to be very drawn to each other. They almost have this charm, and they can have a very beautifully dynamic relationship if they both understand what their triggers are, what their patterns are, what their core wounds are, and how they can show up better in a relationship. I really hope that this podcast helped you understand more of how you work and how you function and why your attachment has been the way that it has. Please remember that I would love to hear from you on Instagram, and whatever you could be struggling with or whatever advice you'd need and you feel would be a beautifully beneficial podcast to anybody else that could hear from, make sure you send me a DM, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And until then, just make sure you have an absolutely beautiful day. And remember, take everything you've learned and sit with it and allow your nervous system to just process it. And just remember, it's absolutely fluid. You want to be able to grow to be someone that's more secure. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's going to teach you how to love yourself better to the point that you are secure and you're in more healthy relationships. Thank you for spending this time with me on Love Better. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who could use a little more love today. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep growing together. You can find me on your socials, Instagram at ShazminBank, TikTok at Shazmin_bank. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and really connect with you more. Until next time, take care of your heart and remember you are worthy of love that truly feels like home.